Hi, everybody, and welcome to the As You Are podcast. We are so excited to be here. My name is Leslie Vandergenst. I'm the founder of Enso Coaching and Consulting, and I'm here with two of our amazing coaches, Adam and Kathleen.
Hey.
And we have our special guest, Miss Lisa Muir, who is the president of the Zilker Hillside Theatre Board of Directors. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Lisa, how long have you been a part of the board of directors for Zilker?
So I've been on the board for 6 years, but I kind of got sucked into Zilker in 2008 on Beauty and the Beast. When we started, that's the first year that my husband and I started volunteering. And then I just kind of stuck around.
Yeah. And your two beautiful daughters were tiny little babies.
Yes.
I was trying to remember, what was Sabrina's first show?
All three of them were in Music Man. That was their
Music
first
Man
show.
was the first one. Okay. Yeah.
And
Music
then
Man.
all three of them were also in Sound of Music.
Oh,
and then Steve and Sabrina were in Oklahoma.
okay.
Wow.
And now Sabrina is in college, about to graduate.
Yes, hopefully.
Alyssa is a grown woman now
Yes, and
has
she just
jobs.
Yeah,
and-
she just took a job with Austin Opera in development.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and she's
Fantastic.
planning the Serenata Gala. So
Amazing.
So cool. Yeah. So it's
Amazing.
been a family affair for you. And
It
so now
has.
you're deeply in the trenches
yes,
of that theater.
that's a good way to put it.
So can you talk a little bit about what Zilker Hillside Theater is and why it's such an important part of Austin?
I will. So this is the 67th year, although it'll be our 66th musical. It was started by a group of actors that just really enjoyed putting on shows, and they started doing shows in the park for free. And then it became a 501c3 in the 80s. And the stage was rebuilt at that point for the actors. And so we are still on 80s technology on that stage.
wow.
So yeah, I just found out recently that the truss that we thought was truss is actually moon tower scaffolding.
Oh,
Yeah, that was kind of fun to find out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's always hidden little gems like that back there. But yeah, it's been around, and we try to keep everything free and accessible for everybody. And it's really cool because through all of this process of the reorganization that we're doing, I've been digging, and I found out that we started doing ASL shows in the early 2000s because one of our cast members had just finished doing ASL training and said, hey, this would be a really great way to reach some people who maybe normally couldn't come out to the show. And so he started doing it at the show, and now the city has taken over that part of it, and they pay for that every year. And then a couple years ago, we had a group, ACEs, came out and said, we'd really like to be able to bring neurodivergent people out, the population out to the show, but there were some special accommodations that would be needed. And so we worked with them, and we were able to get them a quiet space to work to in case they get overstimulated. And we expanded it from one show last year to every weekend, or one show every week this year.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we converted our sound hut into a space with noise canceling headphones and some sensory toys and things like that, so that people can chill out and cool off in there if they need to. And then, of course, we have partnered quite a bit with PARD to do upgrades around the stage. It sounds crazy, but we added backstage bathrooms. I'm sure you remember the time when you had to run over to the bathhouse in your costumes to go to the bathroom. But we have two bathrooms back there now. We have an orchestra room now that was added on. Of course, the ADA compliant stuff, which it's crazy to think, but that wasn't there until we asked and helped build that. Just we live on with our volunteers, and of course, cater to the community and just try to get as many people out as we can. And we promote the heck out of our sponsors.
Yeah. What I want to say, actually, one of the very first things I ever saw when I moved to Austin in 2005 or 6 was Leslie as the lead in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Oh, Seven Brides.
On the hillside.
Yeah.
And I was so amazed to see such a full audience. I mean, I think that it would be hard to imagine anyone who has been in Austin for any amount of time not to know about the summer Zilker Hillside musical, because it just reaches exponentially more audience members than does any other theatrical endeavor in the city, and for free.
100%.
That's true. Yeah, our executive director, who unfortunately we don't have an executive director anymore because we can't afford one, but he put together really great tracking, and so we have very accurate numbers of audience members in this past year. So the city of Austin, the PARD, is out there every night, and they did the counts, and we did some drone stuff, and we had about 66,000, a little bit more than 66,000 people this year.
That's so amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
Yeah, And I think from our part of the reason why we were excited about talking with you is we've all had some part of Zilker in some capacity, in some way, shape, or form. Adam, what have you been involved in with Zilker?
I've been involved with your husband, Leslie, on Hairspray, and then I did the musical direction and choreography for The Wizard of Oz in 2017.
Amazing. And Kathleen?
I have a twofold answer. The first one is I was a performer in Beauty and the Beast. And then the other thing I would say is I grew up in Austin. And so I have a ton of memories growing up and going as an adult and really feeling, as you're saying from your own experience, that generational aspect of it.
Yes.
That it's, that I can think of it truly as some of my earlier stage memories of being an audience member would have been at Zilker. And I want to just express all of the love and how much of going to Zilker is a ritual, really, that it's like you get there at a certain time, you bring your blanket, you bring your food. If you have other friends that are there, you go, you run around and say hello to them. That even before the show starts,
so
there's
special
community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't know how many I did a lot of shows in Zilker, but I also remember Hairspray. My first child, I brought her to Zilker as a 3-month-old. So I
remember that.
Pictures of her, and actually Libby brought her daughter. They were both very, very little.
Yeah.
And we just sat out there with those little sweaty babies watching Zilker, and it's such a magical thing to see these, 20 to 30 actors in full-on costumes. So 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. I mean, I was in petticoat and tights and corsets and heavy dresses and all that other stuff and wig, and you're dancing and sweating in Texas 100-degree heat, but you don't even recognize it. You don't even notice it because there's so much joy in the community and the camaraderie that exists from an actor's standpoint, but then also you're seeing, people out in the audience that are getting to enjoy it, and they're, some people go 3 or 4 times a year because they can.
It's
true. To it.
I also grew up going to it, and I'm old, and it's older than me. So
it's been around.
But I think it's important too, because I grew up in a family of with 5 siblings, and you can't take a family of 7 or 8. Sorry, killing me. To a show at many places because the tickets are too expensive.
Yep.
And we see a lot of families on the hillside, and they do come back over and over again, and you get to see the kids get exposed to it for the first time and then get up and dance. I mean, where else can you let your child get up and dance and sing along and feel comfortable and immerse themselves in it?
Yes.
And I think it's important to have a good experience the first time you see theater.
Totally.
That was one of the things I was actually going to say, that I thought and think is so special about Zilker is that there aren't rules per se. The rules that you kind of get into with, more enclosed spaces even, or decorum or whatever is expected of one, is not an expectation. And it really does allow, it's kind of like the first immersive theater in a way, but it's because you get to experience it on your own terms, and I think that is very special about Zilker. And I'm interested to know, Lisa, so a lot of people who end up becoming presidents of boards or really, investing so much time into the volunteer capacity, come from people who got in a very kind of not as time intensive way, and then they just fall in love with the organization and what it does. What was your trajectory to getting to the leadership point where you are now? What motivated you to want to be in that leadership position?
Well, obviously, I always volunteered with whatever my family was doing, and whether it was soccer or softball or dance or whatever it was, band, you name it. But when I started volunteering with Zilker, we knew a lot of the people already from other groups that we had worked with, and from college, because I grew up, I was born and raised in Austin, and Steve got here as quickly as he could in college. And so, we knew a lot of people already that were in and around the show. And so I started out doing concessions, and he immediately got stuck in the machine that went on Beauty and the Beast. And I had to push the big old thingy around, and it's funny. And then the next year, they were... somebody talked them into auditioning. I don't even remember who it was, but they did audition and they ended up in the show. And so I just kept volunteering. And then I got there one year. It was like, oh gosh, we need more backstage people. Will you work backstage? And I was like, I'm a science person. I don't know how to do this. I'm sorry. And it's like, oh, you'll be fine. That we heard that quite a bit. And so I learned how to push around sets. I was actually working backstage for Hairspray too. Those dadgum gates. Yes. Oh my gosh. I kept running over poor Kaylin's toe. I don't know how many times, I'm sure. But and then another year they were like, hey, we don't have any spot ops. Will you climb way up there and then do the spotlights? So I did that a couple of years, and I enjoyed that. And then when my family was done performing, they were already talking to me about being on the board, because I had been on other nonprofit boards before at that point. And I said, I don't feel comfortable doing it. My family's still involved. And Steve got asked to help with producing, because he was really good friends with Peter Beilharz at the time. And so he did that for a while, and then I got asked to be on the board, and they were completely done with it. And I was like, okay, I'll do this. And then I'm not really quite sure how I ended up being president, but yeah.
That's always that's for every board president. Yeah. That's always
how did it happen?
It happened.
Suddenly I blacked out, woke up.
And people have rolled on and off the board, and we've worked really hard to shape the board with people that have a variety of backgrounds and skill sets. And so I've just stuck around doing it then. And it really truly is a family. I mean, all of y'all are still part of that Zilker family. And I think you know what I mean, because when you come to the Hillside, people recognize you, and they're so excited to see you. You came, you're here, you helped build this. You were a huge part of the history, and you know so much about it from that continuity. And it's very important, because it's not just an Austin tradition, but it's something that has made the arts better and spotlighted the arts in Austin. And we've seen people go on from here in a variety of ways, because before we actually called it an internship, because we were a nonprofit and we were free and in the park, we always had students working with the professionals, and we paid them. And we paid the actors before other people paid them, and the musicians and everybody else. And so it's just a cool thing.
Yeah.
And it's unique. And when people from other places come to see it, they will say, we don't have anything like this in our city. Yeah. Why don't we have anything like this? And I was like, well, I don't know. Go talk to your city. but we do, and we're going to fight to keep it alive. So,
yeah, absolutely.
We were just talking about how in this season, we're going to be talking to a lot of folks who are experiencing challenges organizationally, personally, and that's something we're going to really be delving into. And you all are facing some challenges, some big challenges.
We are.
Right now.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about, maybe start from kind of 2 years ago, 3 years ago with the space, the facility, what's been coming up there?
It actually goes all the way back to pre-COVID, or right around COVID.
Okay.
When COVID hit.
Yeah.
So when COVID hit, we weren't able to do a show that year, and we only do one show a year. So all of the sponsors that were in for that automatically commuted to the next year. So we didn't bring any more money in. Despite that, we still had operating costs. We have a warehouse. We had personnel to pay. We have insurance. We have all sorts of fun things that we get to pay for. Even though the board and many of the people around the show are volunteer, we still have expenses. And I think that's something that people don't really think about in terms of arts employment, number one, and also just in terms of finances. So that year was tough. And then the second year, it was really up in the air on whether or not we were going to be able to do the show in the park. And we were getting too close to the show, and the show that we had picked was not, it was a pretty big show. And so we ended up having to move out to the Hill Country Galleria. They were wonderful in welcoming us, but it was still COVID. And so we had to have people reserve tickets. So it was a very limited audience, and it's a much smaller space than what we're used to. So not only did we have fewer people, we had we didn't have a concession stand, which also drives our funding, and we didn't get as many donations because numbers of people. So that put us in the hole, and I believe that some of the donors, maybe not the sponsors, but the donors were still allowed to commute their donations from the prior year to get the benefits for Newsies, which was 2021. And so, I'm sorry, it was 2022. And anyway, so that hurt us again, even more. And then we came in and our crowds were smaller because there were a lot of new people in Austin at that point that hadn't ever heard about us. And the show was still expensive, but one of the things that I don't think people understand are the costs that go in around just for being in the park. And we pay a lot of money to make it free and accessible to everybody. Like, for example, we pay parking attendants anywhere between $24,000 and $26,000 a year.
Wow.
And we pay for the trash and recycling. We pay for the comfort stations, which is porta potties and the hand washing stations.
Important. That's very important.
And we pay for security. We pay Travis County sheriffs $10,000 a year. Those things add up.
Right.
We also have park permits that are not cheap. So we had all of that, plus smaller audiences, lower donations, and we were already in the hole. And on top of that, the stage was rotting. Austin Shakespeare, we had to tape it off because to make sure that nobody got hurt. And then we spent some money of our own to fix the stage just so it was usable for that show and the next year's show. And then, the two Snowmageddons in a row really leaves on top of the stage, and it not being used for 2 years by anybody, because we're not the only ones in the park that use it, caused it to be even more degraded. So last year, we didn't have the money to do anything. Even though we don't own or manage the stage, we've always helped. But PARD stepped in, and APF paid for PARD to repair the stage. It was about $150,000 if I'm correct. And they completely did the redecking. But when it was done, they said, you're not allowed to drill into the stage for the sets. And we'd already at that point designed and built most of the set. And the front of the stage, the wings that were there, we found out that while the permit was filed initially, it wasn't closed out. So they took that off. And that took out some electrical stuff for our lighting and sound. And so we had to pay a little bit more money to get things done there. And of course, the redesign of the stage and everything, and having to hang the stage from what we thought was the truss, but ended up being moon tower scaffolding. But then they had to go back and redesign the lights because the lights, the weight of it, we had to worry about safety, obviously. And so then we were told that we weren't allowed to use a lift on the stage. You know where those lights go. So we had to use scaffolding. We also had crews working overnight because it's too hot during the day.
Right.
So all these things added up to more in our budget.
And for people who don't do theater production, I think it might sound like, oh, you can't drill into the stage. That is a deal breaker for productions this size. I mean, a total deal breaker. And then, light hangs, having to set truss and not being able to use a cherry picker. It's a deal breaker for
It was a lot. It was a lot.
Right, exactly.
And our electricians, those lights are heavy. They had to use scaffolding to get up there. So not only do you have to carry it up the scaffolding, then you have to put it on the truss. They had burns on their arms from the heat and so it's just, this was our summer last summer.
Hard.
But Unfortunately, yes. But you know, they want to preserve the stage. They spend a lot of money. I get it.
100%.
But there is always maintenance on the stage every year, no matter what. So that all combined to this year. But we had record-breaking crowds. We had a lot of people who got to come out and see it for the first time. And so we were really hopeful that we would get some economic development funding. Last year, I believe we got $30,000, but during COVID, we didn't get any funding at all. And all of the APF money that we got for funding was going into the stage to maintain the stage. In Newsies, APF did give us some funding to help open the show because we were so far behind.
Can you tell people who are listening what is APF?
Oh, it's Austin Parks Foundation. So Austin Parks Foundation is a nonprofit that is able to raise money for the parks. Because the city of Austin is a nonprofit and is government owned, you can't raise money because it's government owned. So APF is a foundation that helps fund all of the parks in Austin and I believe in the Central Texas area. And so they do a ton. And, you know, there's a lot of parks, a lot of maintenance needed, and we're on that list. And so, you know, we get what we can, but it's just not possible to fund everything.
Sure.
Right.
And PARD is the Parks and Recreation Department, which is a city entity.
Yes. And they work with us. And so they give us an in-kind donation every year. And they do this for everybody who's on the stage. But the in-kind donation is the use of the stage plus utilities and the personnel that work the stage.
Great.
And this year it was $45,000, $45,137.
Oh, right.
I know it.
Yeah.
Yes.
She knows it.
Yeah, I know it. Yes.
Yeah.
I've been in the numbers and the weeds the whole time. But yes, so that has been, they do that every year and they partner with us and they work with us. But because of between the bathhouse and the stage renovations, we weren't able to walk that space with them. So a lot of the stuff that was sprung on us was very late. And so it was just a weird year all the way around.
Sure.
And then getting hit with no money moving forward.
So that's the big
one.
bomb.
That was really the last thing. And it was just like, we can't do this. So we had to eliminate the executive director position and we had to move out of the warehouse because those were our two biggest expenses. And we now have two people who have full-time jobs that are an interim executive director and an interim artistic director. We hope to be able to pay them. Right now, we're not able to, but the plan is to do that. And also, we'll post for the positions and as well as hopefully a couple of other positions to spread out the work because it was really too much work for one person anyway, as it was. And we were working on a skeleton crew. And so now it's even worse. It's even more fun, but yeah.
So could you explain a little bit for people who are listening? We may have a slightly better understanding of this as people who work within the Austin arts ecosystem. But for people who are listening who may not understand, you know, we just said that you didn't get funding. And that funding is still city funding, even though you're talking about a foundation that helps to fund a city entity in PARD that gives you in-kind money. But what is now the $30,000 delta that you did not receive this year that you have in the past? Where does that come from?
Okay. So, APF is not technically a city entity, and everything that they do is really more around the parks, not necessarily a production. So PARD also is over the parks, but they assist with the production because they manage the stage. And so they're there helping and working through all of that. The economic development receives funding from the hot tax, the hotel tax, every year. And a lot of it is driven by our festivals and all of the things that we do in the city, the conferences, all of that. I know all of you have been to lots of conferences and put on lots of conferences, so you know what that's like. And so up to, I believe it's up to 15% of that is put into a pool to be dispersed to various arts groups. And so there have been more arts groups. But historically, pre-COVID, they had a different way that they dispersed it. So you would submit your grant and you would meet with them for a certain period of time. They would review your grant. You had to show your budget, everything you spent everything on, and then you would get money. And they funded a lot of groups. They had a very high percentage rate of funding. So then it was changed into 3 different groups. It's Thrive, Elevate, and Nexus. And each group has its own percentage that you can receive or amount. So Thrive is the highest, and you can get anywhere from, I believe it's 85 to 150,000, and Elevate is 40 to 80, and then Nexus are $5,000 grants. We are not eligible for Nexus because it's only for brand new arts groups. So historically, we got anywhere between $75,000 and $125,000 from the city pre-COVID, and then none during that short period of time, 3 years, 2 years, and then we got the 30,000 last year, and then none this year.
None this year
for 2025.
And the 30,000 itself was still quite a bit less.
less.
Yeah.
Over twice or over half.
I mean, like, it took a long time for us to get to this point where we were in a deficit. It took years to get here. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so what these different grant programs that the city is offering, what is their fundamental focus, or what are the things that they're hoping to achieve, and how was it that Zilker was excluded from that?
So the grant process, and I have to say, I was thrilled when I heard about it, because it was really focused more towards historically underfunded or organizations that were not funded at all, because they were overlooked, simply because they were either at risk of erasure or marginalized, or really historically just not reached at all in our city. And I think that the idea was great, but the execution needed a little bit more tweaking. And you know, I sat in the Arts Council meeting last week because it's very concerning to me that we're not the only ones in this boat.
No.
There are a lot of long-standing arts organizations, and I mean some heavy hitters who really, really shaped Austin's arts culture. And not only that, they have historically worked with many of the groups that these grants were meant to fund, and they didn't get anything. Or they got significantly less than what they had before. And now they're struggling, and they're on the brink, and they're cutting. And there are groups that got more money than what they asked for. And I keep hearing, oh, well, so many more people applied than historically. We've also got more money in the pot than we've historically had. And they're saying that there's not enough money to go around. But when I look at the numbers, it just doesn't add up to me. And I do think that there's enough to go around, and I think that there are ways to supplement it as well. But what we were told, okay, let me be nice about this. So there were some things, honestly, I'm a business person. I don't really take things personally. I took some stuff personally. Some of the things about our board, they made assumptions. Number one, that Zilker was well-funded. We are not. And they made comments about our board not being diverse. We're a very diverse board. We have 5 Hispanic women on the board, but and we have an advisory board that's very active. And typically advisory boards don't have voting power, but they do have some decision-making power. And they've been very active with us and helping with us. And we have even more diversity there. But it just didn't matter. And some of the comments were basically really not nice. And just comments about us checking the boxes as if we're trying to check the boxes to meet the grant. And I go, hey, we were country before country was cool. We did all this stuff way back when. We don't do this for the grant. We've been doing this historically for a very long time. Things like the audition workshop. We started that in 2010 when
it's amazing.
Michael McKelvey,
really great.
Michael McKelvey came and before Annie and said, hey, there are kids who don't know how to audition. They don't have this access. They don't have money for this. Let's start this. And so we started.
And that's a free workshop.
It's a free workshop
provide for people who are interested in potentially participating in the Zilker musical before the audition.
2010.
It's fantastic.
We started the ASL in the early 2000s. And, all of the ADA, all of those things we did before it was anything tied to a grant.
Totally.
And so I took that a little personally.
Sure.
Just a
Sure.
little
Absolutely.
personally.
Yeah.
And in the categories on the scoring, there were a couple that I just kind of went, that's a category they can pick, because it it was like, whoa, okay. But there are 7 panelists, and I think talking to other arts groups and kind of seeing what everybody else had issues with across the board, it seemed very arbitrary. And I think that's the biggest problem. There are people that aren't even in Austin that are on the panels and deciding who gets money. And we had 7 panelists. 4 of them were very positive and gave us good high scores. 2 gave us mid to low scores, and 1 gave us mostly 1s, which is the lowest score you can get.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So the spread was so wide that it seemed almost illegitimate.
Yes.
But there's also an outlier in there
There's
too.
one
right?
outlier. Yeah.
You know, the hearing, you know, what you were talking about, and I don't know, again, like what the, you know, how they're making decisions or what the details of all of that are. And maybe that's a great opportunity for us to bring somebody from the city and have and interview them and get some, you know, answers around that too. But to your point around, you know, accessibility to an underserved community, I you know, I'm going to try to tell this story without crying, because every time I tell the story, I like get emotional. But one of my favorite stories about Zilker is a family, a homeless mother.
The letter.
Who wrote a letter. Every time.
I know.
Because I'm a mom. So I do
it
too.
is. Because you think about what it means to you.
Yeah. And she was living
Now
in
you're going to make me cry.
Yeah. And she was living in it. I think the story is really important. It was a homeless mother who was living in the car with her children. And she happened to drive by Zilker and saw that people were gathering. And she unloaded her kids, came and sat on the hillside, and said that there was a family that was near her, and the family shared crackers and cheese and snacks and drinks with the kids. And she ended up writing a letter after to Zilker to say this was one of the most amazing things that my kids got to experience, and sent $1.
This is all I can afford. This is all I can afford.
It is just, you know, and I think it is why I think I've always been passionate about Zilker and the accessibility to like a full-fledged musical program, because anybody can go and see it. To your point, you know, you had 5 other siblings and a family that couldn't afford it. This is, you know, a woman who is in her car, and the joy that it brings, and just that moment of kind of being able to like pull yourself away. And so when we talk about accessibility, like I hear that story, and it's hard for me to kind of understand, you know, how do we continue to make Zilker function in lieu of what is occurring, right?
I will tell you, when people heard our story, they came out in droves, and we got donations. We sold costumes, and I yesterday I handed a thick stack of checks to our part-time executive director and artistic director, and they're going to go hand them out because we were able to finish paying the personnel on the show. That was huge. That was our top priority.
Yeah.
My husband, who has no time, took 3 days off of work basically, and he worked really late at night, but he did the books, because he did the books for River City Pops for many years, and he does them for our company, and so he put all of the stuff together and categorized it so we can see exactly where all the expenditures were, and so we're ready for our taxes and all of that. But people have come out of the woodwork to help, to volunteer, to support us, and I can't say this enough. No amount is too little. We can do a lot with just a little bit, and being able to do that was the best feeling. We've also been meeting with city officials to see if there are other categories that we might fit in for a little bit of funding. But honestly, we're working to restructure completely and not be reliant on any city funding, because we don't expect it. So one of our board members, I'm telling you, we have some amazing board members. We really do. He has a friend, and that found grants for us. So there's 20 grants with all of the dates and all the criteria. We are, as a board, are going to work collaboratively to apply for those grants. And we have 2 volunteer grant writers that will just make sure that they're put together correctly, because we don't know how to write grants. I'm sorry. Not my wheelhouse.
I know.
But, our social media was amazing. Those were 2 board members that put that together, and they hired interns to do it. They did the podcasts all around it. We have, we just put on 2 new board members, and one of our board members works for Apple, and we have volunteers through that have gotten us money. I mean, we're getting it from all different places, but we're also really appealing to local companies for corporate sponsorship.
Great.
There's a lot of money here in Austin, and it would just be nice if maybe 10 companies anteed up enough for us to be able to just get over the hump and then pay for the show ahead of time so that we can continue it, because it's not just a show. It's for our community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Oh no, this is me touching my nose to be like, absolutely. I do that a lot.
And I get asked a lot, would you do a smaller show? We would if we had to. But part of what's important about this is that people who can't go see something on Broadway or at any number of places, Broadway, across America, whatever, can see that quality of a show. Yeah. And kids can be part of that, immerse themselves in it. They can see somebody that looks like them on stage and go, ooh, I can do this. And for me, it's a little bit more personal than that, because one of my daughters has a learning disability. And she had this amazing 3rd grade teacher that taught her Shakespeare. And that's how she learned how to read and write. And music, taught her how to do math. It sounds crazy, but it should.
True.
That's why the arts are so important, because they do help people who think differently learn.
Absolutely.
100%. And so it's a little bit more personal for me than maybe most. But yeah, she was off all accommodations by the time she went to college, and that made a big difference.
It's huge. Incredible. That's so great.
It is. Well, and I think too, for people who, and I'm going to be emotional too, I think for people who are outside of the arts, I imagine that there's sometimes that perception of like, oh, well, this is like a nicety, this is frivolous, when it's like, no, in actuality, it's a necessity.
It is.
It's a necessity for a lot of people, and treating it with the respect and with the resources like the necessity that it is.
Well, and also, you think about all the people who have gotten into college because they have this on their resume.
Right.
They worked with professionals. They learned from professionals.
Exactly.
They got into college, whether it's actors or technicians or musicians. We have a lot of high school and college people that work with seasoned professionals to learn from them. And then they go on to do something bigger. And then they maybe come back and do it and pass it along.
Sure.
Yeah. And honestly, every single one of my daughter's tutors was somebody I met from musical theater, because they got her. They understood how her brain thought, and that's also a big thing too, because so many teachers, everybody out there has another job, because it's we don't pay enough for artists in Austin to make a living, and it's always been our goal to pay more to make it a living, because we're a big enough city to do that. We should be doing that.
Sure.
Everybody should be able to do that.
Sure. So Lisa, what I'm hearing you say is that for the go forward for Zilker is, how do we create a sustainable nonprofit that's not reliant on a source or a few sources, but really how are we kind of diversifying the income? And then what I'm hearing you say is the ask is any amount of donation.
Any amount of
that
donation
you can make.
is good. But we
so
really,
that we could keep this bad boy alive.
Yes. And we really need corporate sponsors. And just, it's simple things that can be paid for, and we will promote the heck out of anybody that does it. We do. I mean, we have pretty low levels for corporate sponsors when you compare other companies this size.
And other cities.
And other cities. We take care of our sponsors, and they get a night on the hillside. They get reserved seating. They get a sponsor lounge. They get lots of advertising in front of 70,000 people, or more. And so it goes both ways. We want to give back as much as we need to receive. So
I love it.
And Austin is not a city in the arts and culture space where corporate sponsorship is as much a part of the pie by any means as other large cities. And I think that it is time for people to step up
100%.
and to be part of this community and culture, because, if Austin represents the creative class, then corporations have a duty to be part of that ecosystem and fabric. And it just has, at least in the 20 years I've lived here, the trends have not shown positively in that way. And I think that this is a great example of how we need to diversify the portfolio of funding in the arts space in Central Texas to include.
This is the live music capital of the world.
Yeah.
Live musical theater capital is it's right there. So we should just make that happen.
Let's make it happen.
Just one word different.
Love that. Well, thank you, Lisa.
Yeah,
we really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Where can people find more information about Zilker?
https zilker.org.
Zilker.org.
Yes.
I mean, make those donations,
And
folks.
we are going to have a show this year
Good.
of some sort. We just don't know exactly what it's going to be right now.
Okay.
And it
I
kind of
love that.
depends on what happens between now and the end of the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's go.
You heard it
people.
here.
Yeah.
That's
heard
right.
It
And
here.
thank you for all the work you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh,
and
my
we're going to have a
goodness.
fundraiser hopefully before the end of the year.
Okay.
So-
All right, let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll be
Call us.
there.
We'll be there.
Call us.
100%.
Listeners, be there too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Can-
All right. We love you.
Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. I know this is wrapping up, but I was just going to ask, what's got you hopeful?
Just the outpouring of support that we've had and being able to pay the people who worked on, not just the performers, but the people who worked on the show. We do have some vendors we still have to pay, but board has stepped up. We've have a completely different plan moving forward, and we had already started putting it in place because we kind of saw the writing on the wall, to be honest. So yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining. Please, as always, subscribe to the As You Are podcast on all platforms. Go to zilker.org, make some money happen, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.